Hello and welcome to the Editing Podcast. We've put together a series of bonus episodes called Point of View, in which we chat to experts from the editing and publishing world.
This interview is with Laura Poole. Laura is a professional copy editor who specialises in working with university presses on scholarly non-fiction, mainly in the humanities. In this episode, we talk to Laura about the importance of fact-checking. Okay, so here we are live at the SFEP conference at Aston in Birmingham, and with us on the Editing Podcast today is Laura Poole, who has come over for the conference from Durham, North Carolina. Welcome, Laura.
Hello, Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
It's lovely to have you. Laura, tell everybody what you do and what some of your specialisms are.
I am a freelance copy editor of scholarly nonfiction, generally in the humanities. So I work almost exclusively for university presses, providing copy editing for books and scholarly journals. And I've been full-time freelance for 22 years.
Excellent. And what sort of things do you cover in your copy editing?
Well, the usual style, clarity, flow, course, grammar, spelling, usage, and punctuation. But I am also charged with spot checking facts. I don't check every single fact. Usually the author is trusted to be an authority and it's been through some development or acquisition rounds. But I do spot check dates, place names. I end up checking a lot of movie details, like what year it was released and the spelling of an actor's name, place names, monarch names, all those sorts of things.
So I think a lot of our listeners might not realise that actually fact-checking is a service that they can access. Can you tell us where in the writing and editing process that should be done?
It can be done in a number of stages, and I encourage authors are expected to have their facts right. So sometimes it's just minor details of things that I'm correcting. But especially if an author is doing a lot of research, for instance, they're writing historical fiction, they're going to need to do research on that particular time and place to make sure things like accents are correct, or articles of clothing or products that the characters are using are specific and correct to that time.
So yeah, that really comes into play with fiction in terms of idiom too. You know, when people I have a fiction author who used what I consider to be quite contemporary idiom, and it was definitely worth me checking. You know, terminology like guys and kids. Would a Victorian have said that? So that kind of stuff needs checking by editors too, doesn't it?
It does. Someone else used a great example of in an episode of Mad Men, which takes place in the 60s. One of the characters said something like, 1968, I am so over you. Which is definitely a modern, and it's the kind of thing that some astute readers, it will take them out of the story, out of the moment. And of course now we have the internet for them to say, this author got it wrong.
And that's a really good point, Laura, because it's not about pedantry, it is about keeping the reader in the story, whether it's fiction or non-fiction. Non-fiction tells the story too. It's about keeping the reader so that they are focused on where they should be, which is on the characters or the narrator or the action, not on whether the author has used something that was correct.
And for scholarly nonfiction, these are academics and people who are supposed to be the authorities in their fields, so sometimes factual errors, hopefully only just small ones that can be easily corrected, will help them seem more like an expert.
I was just thinking what an author can expect in terms of spot checking, because you mentioned that you spot check, which is not the same as a full fact check pass, is it?
It's not.
No. So how much would you check, and how much detail would you go into in a spot check?
I definitely check names that I don't recognize. Frequently place names.
Yes.
I've had authors misspell their own names on occasion. Obscure people that can't find sometimes how a word might be translated correctly. That's the kind of thing I spot check. I know some of my fiction friends also check when a phrase arose and when it was first in use, which you can check with something like Google Ngram, or check the etymology of it. So I learned fascinating things that way. So you get down a rabbit hole of fact checking. Oh no, I have to edit. need to come back. So it's sometimes I'll just check dates of when things happened. It can be very key.
That certainly chimes with the sort of thing I would expect to do. Pretty much the normal part of the copy editing process is that if anything looks a bit unusual, I would want to double check it, particularly like you say, names that I'm not familiar with, or dates, or cities that I don't recognise, that sort of thing. just as a normal part of the process, but authors could ask for a full fact check of something if they felt that that was something that needed attention.
Yes, a separate pass for fact checking.
Yeah.
I've had to unfortunately check facts in proofreading stage and correct them.
Right.
But that was a specific case. They were speaking about a long-running comic series, and just got one of the names of the characters wrong. And I'm like, I have read that over and over and over. I own the books. I can actually photograph you. I could show you this. It wasn't Clarice, it was Ginger. So like, oh, you're right. Thank you. I'm like, I'm maybe the only proofreader would have caught that.
That's a really interesting point, actually, when you're dealing with series of novels, particularly as well, when that fact checking becomes really important, because in terms of consistency, if you've got readers who are loyal, but the editors, a different series of editors have been used,
right,
things can go, if the editor's not on the ball, fact checking works.
And one recent one that I was pretty proud I caught was they were speaking of an artist and said, MacArthur Genius winner, which is just the shorthand version for the MacArthur Fellowship. And I went, oh, did she win it? No, she didn't. She's never been listed as a recipient, so I had to strike that.
And that comes into this idea of, again, that's really important when you're dealing with print stuff, because if that kind of content's going online, or even if it's an online journal article, it can be fixed and changed, and maybe nobody will ever know. But if it's printed stuff that's coming out of a university press, that error is there forever, and reputational damage potentially is huge. So it's a really important step. Laura, what kind of tools do you use for fact checking, apart from your huge brain?
Well, I would say huge brain, but everything looks wrong to me once I started editing. So I used to know how to spell, then I became an editor, and everything looks wrong. So similar with facts. Google for most of it. I can just plug in a phrase or a name. Wikipedia is good for looking up place names or people names, which sometimes I do verify elsewhere. But that's where I look up, does this place name or person name have diacritic marks that use, like Galapagos has an acute accent in it.
It's a good first source, isn't it, Wikipedia, for that? Like you say, you can back it up. But
it is. But I also use IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, for anything related to Hollywood or movies or TV shows, because Nicolas Cage does not have an H in his name, and most people wouldn't think that because Nicolas has an H in it, but his doesn't. Or that movie was released in 1965, not 1964, or it did win an Oscar for Best Cinematography, but you have the wrong cinematographer name. So all of these things I check on IMDb.
One that I catch a lot, I work on educational books, is Spider-Man. Spider-Man is hyphenated with a capital N.
It is.
And a lot of people get that wrong. And it's always so satisfying.
It is.
Correction.
So these are the kind of things we check.
Because when you're aiming your content at these are teenagers, it's educational books, that's going to really reduce its credibility. It's going to annoy them, and they don't know what they're talking about.
We must make sure to put links to the tools that I know most people will be able to find Google and Wikipedia. But the Internet Movie Database, some people might not have heard of. And
there's another very interesting one, and somebody's actually speaking about it today here at conference, which is the Historical Thesaurus of English, which is based out of the University of Glasgow. And that has a lot about etymology and usage and when words first came into common parlance.
Google Ngram is also good for that.
But that doesn't come up. So it stopped at 2008, I think.
I think so.
So.
It is useful for. Was this really used in the 1840s, or did it not really grow until the 1870s?
Exactly.
And I also, for anything related to countries and governments or politics, I like to use the U.S. has the CIA World Fact Book, which is tremendous for we say West Germany, but was that really the Federal Republic Government of Germany, Federal Republic of Germany, or the Democratic Republic of Germany were the political entities. So for what we shorthand call North and South Korea, same as North and South Vietnam, they had different governmental entity names. Sometimes that's really important to look up.
There's another thing I thought of for fiction, and is that one thing a lot of my authors come unstuck with time and time again is firearms. The number of times silencers or suppressors end up on guns that don't take them. And of course, as a British editor who lives in a country where ownership of guns is far lower. That's something I absolutely need to check, and I found one of those just the other day, and the author was thrilled. And it's just, but it is so satisfying fact checking, isn't it? When
it is.
In terms of from an editorial point of view, but also such a great thing for the author to know that their books and safe
someone's looking out for them.
And one of my favorite things to fact check is food and wine names.
Oh, right.
Because there's so many that, you know, I was just explaining to some people from here, they're like, what's rocket? I'm like, it's arugula. Oh, no, it's not called rocket in the United States, so I happen to know it's arugula. Yes, but my favorite special resource dictionary, which is now I think only online, was the Barron's Food Lover's Companion.
Oh, right.
And so all cheeses seem to be capitalized because they're all named after places, and a lot of wines as well. But it was really lovely to look up what this dish was. Did it have this ingredient in it? I love that kind of fact checking.
And like you say, capitalization of these things is important, you know, to get that right, because there will be people who know about these things that are reading them, and you don't want to irritate your readership,
or worse, your reviewers, professional reviewers. It stands out.
I suppose that leads on to a conversation about whose responsibility it is, because it's a big job. It's not a job that the author can do necessarily all themselves, because they may be focused on story or information exchange. To what degree do you think, Laura, that it is the copy editor's responsibility to catch this stuff, and how much of it? Because it's a big ask.
It is.
When you're being hired as a copy editor, not as a specific fact checker, do you have a sort of like, I don't know, a kind of range with it, or a set of boundaries that you tend to think of when you're doing this?
I do. I like I said, I spot check anything that looks odd. I've gotten a little more consistent because it's so fast. I could just zip over to. I don't have to go to an encyclopedia now, which is it saves me a lot of time. I'll start to know whether the author really has their stuff right fairly quickly, and so I'm like, do I need to keep heavy fact checking, or can I trust them on some of this stuff? So every person who provides a task has some responsibility. At the end of the day, the author's name is the one on the book, so they're the one who are accountable, which is a little different from responsible. And that is who's going to answer. Sometimes the publisher, if they haven't verified the facts. Okay. So there was a case earlier this year, in about May. The author Naomi Wolf, who does research, was promoting a book in the UK on the BBC radio or TV, I'm not sure. But the host said, I think you've got something basically wrong in this book. She was talking about cases of people who were jailed and even executed for crimes against nature or sodomy laws at the time, and she had interpreted the line "death recorded" meaning that they were executed, not realizing that death recorded was a separate category, meaning I don't want to execute you, so I'm going to record your death and you're released. And the host was able to say, I don't think this means what you think it means, and I could show you here this particular person you're speaking of in this book was released. Here's his release date, and then he didn't die until like 20 years later. And so sometimes it was hyped as the whole premise of her book is wrong, but later she said only 2 pages needed to be changed, but she did have to make a lot of changes make some changes at least, before the US edition came out. Apparently they had to recall already printed.
Also, she would not have enjoyed that opportunity to promote her book and being called out. It's not how she wanted to spend her time. The control was taken away from her. It became somebody else's space to
But at that point, it was an assumption made by the author that nobody else would have thought to check. So to unfortunately be fact-checked live on air during a promotional tour is not ideal. It is unfortunate.
And I think it's also when you're editing is especially with academic work, you don't want to be seen as calling out an author on their specialist area. You know, if you're asking them to confirm things that you think might sound a bit suspect. So it's a very fine line for editors between effective and sensitive querying and just saying you've got this wrong. So and that's one for our editor colleagues to think about.
And for fiction, that kind of thing comes into play, but kind of on the other side of the coin, because actually when it comes to made up stories, it might be that the author wants to employ a little artistic license. So maybe there's a deliberate choice to have that flag design incorrect, because it's maybe it's central to a what if plot or something like that. And so again, that comes up with, rather than calling them out, actually having a conversation. Was that deliberate? You know, so.
And sometimes it is. And I've read prefaces in books like, forgive me for stretching what didn't happen in the 1840s. I know it didn't happen until the 1860s, but I actually brought it back a little bit, and forgive me for that. And you're like,
and that's fine, because then it's up front and people know that. And
but that is actually, for our listeners, that's a good call, Laura, to maybe, if you've got information like that where you're going to sort of be a little bit flexible with the reality, to maybe use the preface or a foreword, or ask someone else to create a foreword in which those points are addressed, so that you're not having that distraction in the story itself. So
absolutely.
Thanks for mentioning that.
Certainly.
Great. Well, Laura, thank you very much for taking some time to talk to us.
My pleasure.
It's always a pleasure to spend some time with you.
It's always a pleasure to hang out with you, definitely.
And we hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
We'll probably ask you to come on and speak to us again.
I'd love to.
I think there's a lot more to say on this area. So, come back.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed this bonus episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Editing Podcast. You can rate, review and subscribe to us via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whichever platform you use to listen.
And if you have any questions, please do get in touch with us via the Editing Podcast Facebook page. We've put all the links we've mentioned in the show notes, so you can grab everything there.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.